All right, girls, welcome to my second podcast for ancient Greece. I'm going to finish up talking about the Acropolis and Greek architecture and then just cover anything else I think you need to know for your test, though do not forget to finish the reading. Absolutely, finish the reading, play the Jeopardy, and go through your notes, okay? So, back to the Acropolis. We looked at the model, we started talking about the Parthenon, and I did tell you that the Greeks were very concerned with proportion, and they came up with mathematical formulas for the construction of the Parthenon. So in your text, I'm reading here, it says, for the Parthenon, the controlling ratio for the symmetria of the parts may be expressed algebraically as x equals 2y plus 1. Thus, for example, the temple's short ends have 8 columns and the long sides have 17. Therefore, 17 equals 2 times 8 plus 1. The stylobase ratio of length to width is 9, or 4, and 9 equals 2 times 4 plus 1. And this ratio also characterizes the cella's proportion of length to width, the distance between the centers of two adjacent column drums, in proportion to the column's diameter, and so forth. So, kind of confusing, especially if you're not very math oriented like myself, though you don't have to remember all of that. You just have to know that they, and I have it here, Greeks thought that beauty was something that could be constructed mathematically, okay? It contained a 40-foot statue of Athena, so it celebrated the goddess Athena, but note here it also celebrates the Athenians themselves. And I showed you a frieze in class that I said was very important. It was on previous AP exams. You definitely have to know it. Do you remember the name of it or what it was about? It is called the Panathenaic Festival frieze, and it is celebrating a festival the Athenians have every 4 years, okay, that celebrates the people of Athens rather than the gods and goddesses, which was very new and important, okay? So the Parthenon contains many friezes all throughout the inside and outside, and pediment sculptures, and many of the themes are fights between the gods and giants, and also Amazons, which were other composite creatures, and and celebrations of the Athenian people themselves. So if we take a look at the plan, here's the plan of the Parthenon. The other thing that you need to remember about the Parthenon is that it is, for the most part, is a Doric temple. However, it does include Ionic elements, so it has a mix of Doric and Ionic columns. And here are all the themes here labeled for you. So in this pediment, they have the birth of Athena. In this, in these metopes, they have the sack of Troy. The Panathenaic processional frieze is pretty much wrapping around the entire thing. And then this is where the cult statue would have been, the giant statue of Athena, which I'm going to show you in just a second. Okay, here's another Centauromachy. Centauromachy, so giants battling, the gods battling centaurs. So note the amount of columns has increased as we get later on in Greek history. You know, the amount of columns has increased, but they're mixing Doric and Ionic. The columns are becoming more slender, and they're placing them further apart, and they've made room in the cella for the cult statue so that it can be viewed from the porch. Okay, and then in the next slide you have, this is a reconstruction of the Athena Parthenos, which would have been located in the cella of the Parthenon, done, by the way, in the 5th century. And we do have the architects here, Ictinos and Callicrates. You definitely have to know that, so remember their names. They were the architects of the Parthenon. And back to her. So she would have been about 40 feet tall. She would have contained gold, real gold, precious gems, and made of ivory as well. Okay, so she also has weapons, you know, showing her power and authority, kind of going along with the theme of the Acropolis, and is also holding a personification of victory, um, also known as Nike, who we've looked at before. Okay. What else did I want to say? I think that's it about her. Okay, so I skipped over a couple things, but this is the Propylaea, which you need to know is the gate or entryway to the Acropolis. It also has a mix of Doric and Ionic columns, so it has Doric on the outside, Ionic on the inside, and also contained a picture gallery, which may have been one of the first art galleries ever to exist. Okay, and this would have been added in Roman times. After Rome takes over Greece is when they added this art gallery. Okay, here's another view of the Propylaea. And here's the Erechtheion. Okay, so you remember how I said it's known for its Caryatids. So that's really the way you can distinguish it from all of the other buildings in the Acropolis, because they kind of look similar. I mean, the Temple of Athena Nike you can spot because it's so small, but the Propylaea and the Erechtheion are similar in size. You just want to remember that the Propylaea is the entryway and the Erechtheion contains these Caryatids. Okay, and it's also, you can also see the Ionic columns quite well here. So, you know, you can tell because they're so tall and slender, and then you can see the scrolling volutes at the top. Okay, so this was a shrine to several gods, whereas the Parthenon is dedicated to one god. Okay, it also has an asymmetrical shape or an irregular plan. So if you look at the plan here, you can see that if we split it down the center, it's not exactly the same on both sides. So that's another thing to note about the Erechtheion. And here's a close-up of one of the Caryatids that was on the south porch of the Erechtheion. And hopefully you're familiar with Caryatids by now. And then this is the Temple of Athena Nike, very small, contains more Ionic columns. You have a good view of them there. And as with the Parthenon, reference is made to the victory over the Persians with a frieze depicting the Battle of Marathon. All right, so, and that here it says it contains more humans and not gods. So that is a change from the past. So in early classical and archaic, that you would see a lot more references to gods and goddesses and not so much to mortals. So that, you know, they're kind of sneaking in regular people into the artwork. Okay. Okay, there's another view. And before I continue, I need to go back to this because I feel bad I didn't tell you which building is which here. So Parthenon, obviously, the biggest one. Propylaea, easy, that's the entryway. The Temple of Athena Nike is this teeny tiny one way up here. Okay, and then the Erechtheion is way back here. So make sure you know where they all are. Another thing I wanted to mention as we move forward here is to maybe read up on Greek vase painting. Again, if you need to refresh your memory about the black figure technique, which came first, then the red figure technique, the bilingual, which is the combination of the red and the black, and then just know what a crater and an amphora are and what they're used for, and be able to point them out if you are shown an image of them. Hint, hint. So moving along here, we're in the late classical period now, and not going to talk about sculpture, but I just want to remind you to make sure you know all four of these sculptors and what they're known for. And just remember that sculpture in the late classical period and the Hellenistic period are known for its humanizing tendency, in that gods and goddesses start appearing more like real people, in that we see emotion starting to appear on their faces, troubled looks, wrinkles, things like that. So just remember that about the sculpture of this time. So late classical architecture, the big one you want to know is the amphitheater here. So, and you saw where it was when we looked at the diagram of the Acropolis. It was very close to the Acropolis. And I mean, this was pretty amazing because there were no, like, microphones or speakers or anything like that. But the way it was constructed really allowed, for people sitting way in the back, in the nosebleed seats, they could really hear all of the plays that were going on down here on the stage. So the acoustics in this theater were pretty amazing. And it was also built into the hillside. So up here you can see this land. So that is what was supporting the theater. Okay, and this was also constructed by Polykleitos the Younger, possibly a relative of the Polykleitos we know who developed the canon and did the famous Spherebearer sculpture. Okay, we don't have to take a look at that. So here we have a close-up of a Corinthian capital, so you can see the detail of the acanthus leaves in here. And you want to remember that late classical, Hellenistic, and Roman architects preferred the Corinthian capital, which is the most decorative of the three. And here is this monument, the Choragic monument of Lysicrates in Athens. And this is pretty cool because it has Corinthian engaged columns. Hopefully you remember engaged columns are attached to the architectural structure that they are built with. And here we have, it says, the things that you want to remember that you can associate with late classical architecture are tholos, or round buildings, like the one we're looking at, theaters, which we just talked about, and then Corinthian columns. Okay, moving into Hellenistic period, you want to remember that it begins with the death of Alexander the Great, whereas the classical period begins with the defeat of the Persians. Okay, so looking at some Hellenistic architecture, you can see that, again, the number of columns is increasing. Look at the amount of columns here. Lots and lots and lots of columns, okay? And the plans I have here are the Temple of Hera 1 at the bottom, so this would be archaic Greek architecture, the Parthenon, which would be classical Greek architecture, and then what we're looking at right now is the Temple of Apollo, okay, which would be Hellenistic Greek architecture. So just tons and tons of columns, mostly Corinthian columns. This is the city of Pren in modern-day Turkey, built during the 4th century, and this was designed by this guy named Hippodamus, and he sort of experimented with city planning, so it's one of the earliest cities, okay, because the buildings were so close together, and it was like a big grid, basically. So and this was known as Hippodamian planning. So all streets met at right angles and had a grid plan regardless of terrain. And so it was kind of very hilly and had a lot of uneven areas, but he somehow made this grid plan happen regardless. And this would be a plan of a Greek home, typical Greek home, which we don't know a whole lot about Greek homes. Just you want to know that they are rectangular, so they fit into the Hippodamian grid, but inside they were not symmetrical, meaning they're not the same on both sides. And then you have this term down here, an andron, which would be a Greek dining room. So this is the altar of Zeus. This would have been in Pergamon, modern-day Turkey. Has a large frieze here wrapping around, and I think, yes, this is a reconstruction. This is the most famous of all Hellenistic sculptural ensembles and contains a frieze that was almost 400 feet long with over 100 life-size figures, so these would have been very, very large. You will see this again. This is from the altar of Zeus. So you want to note the writhing movement. That was a characteristic of Hellenistic Greek sculpture. The movement, the emotion on the faces. If we compare this to this earlier frieze that we looked at, you can see that this relief is more of a high relief coming out of its architectural background. It contains a lot more movement and a lot of emotion. And I'm actually out of time, girls, so good luck on your test on Tuesday and have a good evening.